Hello, everyone. My name is Stephen Blackburn from District Administration, and welcome to our webinar here today, Making Standards-Based Grading Sustainable, where our panel will be discussing moves that leadership can make to keep their teams on track. And all this is brought to you by the generous support of our sponsor with us here today, Otis. Now, I am going to do some quick housekeeping items. I'll try to keep this as brief as possible. If your audio does cut off at any time during the presentation, or maybe your slides freeze at any time, just refreshing your screen should fix that issue. So again, any audio video issues, just refresh your screen and that should resolve everything for you. At the end of our main presentation, there will be a live Q&A with our panelists here. And you can submit your questions below. If you look at the bottom of your screen, just click on the red Ask Question box to submit your question. It's the one with the question mark in the chat bubbles. And again, you can do that anytime during the event. After the live Q&A, so at the very, very end when I close us out, a post-event survey will launch on your screen automatically. But if you do need to jump off early for whatever reason, we understand you have very busy schedules, we would ask you to click on the survey button also at the bottom of your screen. It's the pink box with the checklist, because we'd love to hear your feedback. There's also some great assets you can safely download, an ebook on how 3 schools are communicating mastery through their standards-based grading scales, also a write-up on 2 schools that are making real work behind better grading. And again, to access those and other resources, you just go to the bottom of your screen and click on that blue box there with the paperclip at any time. And lastly, you'll be pleased to know that everyone who's here today, everyone who registered, all of you will receive an email tomorrow from us at DA. And that email will include a link to the slides as well as the on-demand video. So look out for that in your inboxes, everyone. And now it is my pleasure to bring in our main moderator today, who will set the stage for today's conversation and introduce our amazing panel. And that moderator is Kendall Hunter, who is Director of Marketing at Otis. Kendall, you may now begin.
Hey there. Thank you so much, Stephen and District Administration. Hi there to everyone joining us. Welcome. My name's Kendall. I'll be your moderator for today. Like all of you, my background's in education. I'm a former reading specialist and middle school special education teacher, so it's really special for me to get to moderate these webinars with our incredible panel. Otis is the sponsor of today's webinar. We work with districts to make standards-based grading actionable by bringing assessment, progress monitoring, and reporting into one place, so teams can really stay aligned without adding more systems. As Stephen mentioned, be sure to check out that resource list. We put together some really helpful and informative standards-based grading resources that you can take back to your teams after this. Today's session is a true roundtable. We're joined by 3 leaders who will share what grading looks like in their districts. They'll talk about the systems and groundwork that make their grading systems work consistently, very important word there to add on, and then how they approach some common challenges. We'll even do some live troubleshooting so you can hear how each leader would or has addressed roadblocks that may have come up in their experience. The goal of today is to keep things really practical and rooted in their real world experience. So with that, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about all of our speakers, and then we'll jump into our conversation today. First up, I want to introduce Shannon Treese, the Executive Director of Babcock Schools in Florida, and an innovative leader focused on authentic learning, strategic partnerships, and service-centered leadership. Shannon began her career as a teacher in Kentucky in 2000, quickly moving into administration and serving on statewide committees, including a governor-appointed role influencing education policy, which is very cool. As a principal, Shannon redesigned summer school into service learning experiences and has developed global partnerships centered on empathy and cultural awareness. Since 2017, Shannon has served as the founding principal of Babcock Neighborhood Schools, leading its rapid growth, earning top state ratings and accreditation, and expanding advanced academic and workforce pathways. So welcome to Shannon. Thank you for being here. Next up, we have Carrie Luter, who is also from Babcock Schools, but the curriculum director. Carrie has 20 years of experience in education. She spent 11 years teaching grades 3 through 5 before moving into district leadership. Over the past 9 years at Babcock, she has led curriculum adoption, guided the development of standards-based grading, coordinated state assessments, and supported the onboarding and integration of Otis for staff and families to really strengthen that data-driven instruction and communication. Last but certainly not least is Susan Anderson in her 5th year as learning technology coach for the School District of Monroe in Wisconsin. Susan brings more than 18 years of experience in education to today's conversation. Susan spent over a decade as a high school English teacher and is a national board certified educator. She's led the secondary staff at Monroe's shift to evidence-based grading, serving as both the lead architect for the district adoption of Otis and holding those administrative district administrative licenses, really combining that strategic planning with hands-on support for staff and students. So as you can see from those backgrounds there, we have a panel with a wealth of experience and is really just ready to share with you all some of what they've learned. Before we jump into the conversation, I just want to ground us in some shared context for what we'll be talking about. Now, depending on the state or district that you're joining us from, you may use different language for what we're going to call today's standards-based grading. You may say mastery-based, standards referenced. You may use a hybrid model. But at the core, we're all talking about this same shift, this goal of making learning expectations more clear than what a single points-based grade can provide to students. Now, how that's going to show up in practice looks different in every system, and you will hear that today from our panelists and between the two districts in Wisconsin and Florida. One comparison I always come back to is taking your car in for service. If the mechanic told you that your car's a B or an 85% and just kind of sent you on your way, you'd probably be wondering, what does that mean? How do my brakes look? Do I need new tires? Should I purchase a new battery? Standards-based grading gives everyone, students, teachers, families, that new level of clarity so you know exactly what students need to focus on. So it really kind of shifts that conversation. As we jump into this conversation today, we are going to focus more on what it takes to make grading reform work. So we're not going to dig too much into the philosophy behind what these schools are doing, but you'll hear more practical solutions from school leaders who are making this work. So with that, we are going to start our conversation here. Carrie, I'm going to toss it to you first. Can you tell our audience here today how you describe your grading model, and then what systems make it work consistently across classrooms at Babcock?
Sure. Our school adopts a standards-based grading model to ensure that our grades actually reflect what students' mastery of content standards. We focus on mastering standards across the year. So it's not about what they know at this point and we move on to something else. They have all year to grow and develop their mastery of each content standard. It's different from traditional letter grades in that we don't incorporate factors such as behavior, attendance, or extra credit into our grading. It's truly based on what students know and can do based on the learning targets and standards from our state.
Thank you so much for setting that tone. Shannon, I know you're also at Babcock Schools. Did you want to add on there or provide any additional context around how grading looks within your district or ways you make that work across classrooms?
Sure, that's something that really the Otis platform has helped us with, is really leveraging continuity across grade levels with the standards, ensuring that, when we're talking about a standard, there is some consistency and calibration that goes into what does that mastery look like. That isn't something that has happened overnight. I know Ms. Luter and I both have talked extensively about how long that process has taken us to get where we are. But the intentionality around learning can happen at any point in the year without it being consequential to the performance of the student. So if the student masters it right away, then great, they can move on to another standard that they need to work on. But if it takes them, 18, 25 weeks, to master something in math, that's okay. They are not given consequences for mastering content in a specific amount of time. The goal is that by the end of the year, that growth is evident over time and that they've been working on those standards that need it the most. And there's intentionality from the teacher and the student on what that focus is. So it truly is about the growth mindset. We would not expect a student to come into Algebra 1 mastering all the standards. We expect them not to have mastered most of the standards until well into the spring of the year. But giving the time and space and support for that to happen has really been part of our transition over time, and just helping students understand that it isn't about a certain stopping point. It is about continuous learning and continuous growth through that process.
Thank you so much. One quick clarifying question for your audience. You mentioned how long it's taken to get to where you are now. And thinking about how this is a journey for students, I know this is a journey for schools too. About how long ago did you all kind of embark on the standards-based grading reform journey, since, you know, we're kind of talking about what you've learned. So curious how long ago you all started.
8 years. We started when we opened the school in 2017. So we've had several renditions, several adjustments, several changes. We'll probably have more even this year. It really is no different than the students. As we learn and process information, we try to make adjustments in what, you know, our written documents say about standards-based grading and how we approach certain things in standards-based grading. But we are continuous learners over here.
I love that. No, and it's so true. Every year we have to recalibrate in some way, right? There's going to be something that maybe we tried out and it didn't work exactly as designed. So we're going to switch it up and learn from that for the following year. And hey, what does that tell our students too, right? We all take these risks. Sometimes they work out, sometimes they don't. But I want to hear from Susan. Susan, tell us a little bit more about grading at Monroe School District. I know the model is a little bit different, so excited to hear more about how you all structure your model, and then just some systems that you think really make it work in classrooms across the district who are implementing this model. Oh, you know what, Susan, you are muted. I'm so sorry.
I was, thank you. In Monroe, we structure the grade book to start with enduring skills at the top. So I was an English teacher, enduring skills in English, reading, writing, speaking, listening, language, grammar, right? But then in other disciplines, it might be a kind of group of state standards. So for example, in science, they have 3 overarching skills, which are investigating, sense-making, and critiquing practices. And so state standards get housed underneath that. Math deals with simplifying and solving, deals with visual representations, and deals with justify and reasoning. So in Otis, one thing we like is that we have custom standards for each of those enduring skills, and then those enduring skills also work across our building. So a skill a student might be working on in reading also may happen in social studies. You might see math skills show up in business and so on. So that's at the top. And then underneath that, similar to the standards-based kind of typical model, you'll see that list of success criteria, like your example for your vehicle, right? Those are the things that you're looking for on that checklist. So one thing that's been important, and I think the gals in Florida alluded to this, is just having teachers on the same page about what that success criteria is. How do we know what proficiency is in this skill? And it's really interesting when you pose that question to folks, sometimes how wildly different our interpretation of proficiency might be. And then also, where does that fit during the school year? We're in a trimester system. So we are right now almost closing out here trimester 2, turning over into trimester 3. We are also a public school district. So at the high school, we still give letter grades. So we have a conversion scale to take those 4s, 3s, 2s, and 1s in each skill bucket. And then we convert that over into a letter grade at the end. And but it's very similar for folks who have been at the elementary level for a long time. I have elementary school kids and middle school kids. And so you're looking again at what are those skills that we need kids to be able to do, and where are they at in relation to where we need them to be.
Thank you so much for sharing that, and especially for mentioning that conversion. We did have a question come in from our audience just around what that final grade or reporting kind of looks like. Before we move on, we are going to talk about assessments because we can't talk about grading. We're not talking about how we're assessing students. I did just want to either Carrie or Shannon, would you mind all sharing, are you doing standards-based report cards as well? Or are you doing a conversion into a letter grade similar to how Monroe has things set up? Would either of you mind just kind of alluding or sharing more about that final outcome or grade?
Yeah, we do a conversion. We report
Okay.
letter grades out into our SIS.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I know that always, that technical piece is important.
I will add that thankfully our district that we are in, because we're a public charter in the school district that we're in, they have been accommodating this year to hear our philosophy around that, you know, this achievement level isn't stopped at a 9 week or a quarter, you know, or a semester. So they've allowed us to report at the semester and the end of the year specifically. So we will override those middle of the year scores with whatever the end of year is, so that it is an accurate reflection of where they end and not an average. But that has taken us a little time to get used to, or get to that point with the district. We've been able to show them our work and the work we've done to reduce inflation, and they have allowed us some flexibility this year that we've not been previously afforded.
That's huge. Just kind of getting that buy-in over time, as you said, doesn't happen overnight. This is a big shift. We're going to have to do some education, continued discussions around why we're doing this, but it seems like you've got a big win this year for your community, and that you can really kind of show that reflection of where we end the year and the journey to it too, because then we can see like, oh, they were here and they're ending here. This is learning. So I love that. Thank you for adding that. I think that's really important context for folks joining us today, just around that work that you're doing locally to educate your community on the why behind the day-to-day practices. Okay, digging into the assessment piece, I wanted to ask the group more about how you ensure alignment between assessments and curriculum used by teachers, and how that kind of connects back to your district's grading practices. So how do you make sure what's happening day to day with your curriculum and your assessments all kind of reflects your broader grading practices? Susan, did you want to start us off on this one?
Sure. So there's a couple of things that we do in Monroe to work on this. Obviously, going back through PLC work, you want that, you know, guaranteed and viable curriculum. So you want somebody who's sitting in, you know, third hour U.S. history to get the same experience as somebody who's sitting in fourth hour U.S. history with a different teacher. So we really have a long history of PLC work here. So we have tight knit teams who do that PLCs, and we're fortunate in our district that teachers have PLC time baked into the master schedule. So if I teach U.S. history and Kendall teaches U.S. history, my principal ensures that we have common prep. So I could see you every single day at the same time, and we can collaborate. So that's really, really great. We also have a PLC time on Friday afternoons. And that's baked into our schedule. So just the time structure is, I think, really important. If you want this level of collaboration, there has to be a structure for this level of collaboration. And then at those meetings, so I go to all of them as the learning coach, right, and PLC coach. So I'm at those, but my principals attend those. District C&I director might drop in on those. Special ed folks are there for those. Reading interventionists and math interventionists would show up. So those are calendared events, which is great. It helps keep that assessments and systems together because there's a lot of eyes on what's going on. One thing my C&I director and I did this last year is we did some summer curriculum workshops where we set up structured time for teachers to come and do that curriculum work with us. So they had to do the first, 4 or 6 hours of that together with us. And then the second half, we kind of released them to keep going and keep working on it. But that's been really helpful as we were building it. So not that it's micromanaging, they're doing the work together. I don't know what, your biology unit 5 test should look like, but I do know the principles we want it to live up to. And so it was a great way for us to reinforce those principles. This is what evidence-based grading looks like. This is how are you going to get that evidence of student learning. So I think knowing your principles, setting up your structure for that support and monitoring system, those summer workshops really, really helped. And then honestly, we're like 4 years really into this now, but enough students know what this should look like because they have, really strong, successful classrooms. So when it's not going that well, in a spot, the kids will speak up. The kids know, what it really should look like. So that's another thing that will sort of happen organically is eventually for folks who are still transitioning, eventually it'll tip where there's more of a norm now of what this work looks like.
Thank you so much for sharing more about that. I really appreciate how you keep it collaborative because, as you said, it's not micromanaging, it's just using each other's strengths, right? You have additional context around the bigger vision that everybody in those meetings may not show up with, but through your presence and support, you can guide them to get there. Carrie, do you want to jump in and tell us more about the assessment and curriculum component within Babcock?
Sure. When we transitioned into using Otis, we knew that we needed to kind of hone in on what exactly we were going to include in our gradebook and how we would assess students' mastery of standards. So at our school currently, there are only two ways that assessments are tied to the gradebook. So there's two ways that teachers can and students can show evidence of learning. One is our assessments come directly from the unit assessments within our curriculum. This ensures that we are providing our kids appropriate rigor of content and questioning. And then each question is also tied back to one of our state standards that we know will be assessed in our statewide assessments. So that's the one way. And then we have our other way is through rubric assessments, and those come in through PBL projects and other areas.
Thank you so much. Shannon, did you want to just jump in and share any additional context for how you all kind of ensure that what teachers are doing aligns back to the broader grading practices for your district?
Sure. Just simply because of us being a project-based learning school as well as a standards-based grading, we also don't want to lose the component that we are really striving for in that project-based learning experience in the classroom. So there are a couple ways as the teachers are building those projects for that PBL experience within the classroom. They can certainly lean into their curriculum resources and materials. Sometimes the projects derive from that, sometimes they don't. Either way, what we've learned through a collaborative process with our teachers is using a protocol that we refer to as CFG, a critical friend group. And in that critical friend group, they're basically working through kind of a guide for what their driving questions are, who are the community partners, what are the assessments going to look like, what are projects within the project itself that could potentially be assessed with a rubric, if there are labs that are included. You know, all of those things are great projects. That doesn't make it a PBL. A good project can just be a good project, but they also need to be vetted to ensure that we're hitting the level of quality that we're looking for. So that happens through that critical friends group process. The other piece that we do include, I think Carrie mentioned this as well, are the state writing rubrics. So any writing that teachers are doing in their classroom, it wouldn't matter what content, they would be assessing those writings against those state writing rubrics. Again, just to ensure alignment with what's going to be expected in the spring. And what we reiterate with our families, we reiterate with our staff, you know, the state testing is before, not the ceiling, right? It's the minimum level that we're looking for. So the project should be bringing more rigor, more depth to the learning in the classroom around curriculum. That is the goal. It's to have more rigor, not less.
Thank you so much. Yeah, those rubrics and kind of looking at the evidence as well as the work samples is such an important part of that teacher alignment. That's really essential to making all of this work. Those proficiency scales won't mean much if we're not actually comparing 3s or 4s or whatever language we're using. So I love hearing that. I do have one question, and then we're going to transition into looking at some roadblocks or common challenges that school leaders may face as a group. But I'm just curious to hear from everyone. Kind of looking back at the early phases of this transition to standards-based or evidence-based practices. And I know for each of you that may be a little bit different depending on when your district started, but I'm wondering what early decisions or non-negotiables may have come up that had the biggest impact on long-term success for you all. Carrie, do you want to start it off?
Sure. Probably the biggest thing was is getting everybody on the same page with our standards-based grading in general, and then creating a philosophy that works for us here at Babcock. And as Therese had mentioned earlier, that's kind of always in revision. After every year, we kind of make tweaks to what our processes and procedures are. But we started, we require that all of our new teachers, we go through a book study. We use Ken O'Connor's A Repair Kit for Grading, 15 Fixes for Broken Grades. That kind of gives our teachers and staff a background of just standards-based grading practices and why we do it and what makes it work. And this helps us keep everyone on the same page with our systems philosophy. And then it also gives them the confidence to communicate it out, right? And then we made sure that there's clear communication on what our grading policies are and our expectations. We have a document that we kind of follow and refer back to, and that's the document that we tweak at the end of every year after we get feedback from teachers of how the year went with our policies. And then also monitoring those expectations. So what we put in that document and we say we are doing, then our building administrators go back and they kind of just monitor, like, is that truly what's happening in our grade books and in our lessons?
I love hearing that you have a source of truth for everyone to kind of go back to and just see, you know, what do we need to do differently? What did we originally document this as? Is that what we're doing? It sounds like, or what I'm hearing is that it's just like a layered, tiered support system for staff in the same way that you do for students is really a takeaway I'm getting here. We've got different checks and balances at every level to make sure teachers are getting what they need, and then students are supported the way that, you know, the vision is. Because if it's not working the way it was designed, you know, that's where you hit some challenges. But Shannon, I want to toss it to you as well and just give you an opportunity to answer the same question around our early decisions or non-negotiables that might have had a big impact on long-term success from your perspective.
Yeah, I would echo what Carrie has said. I mean, we've both lived it here, but it is exponentially important to really put some clarifying foundational understanding for when people come on board, so that there is some common language, and that when we're referencing specific components or frustrations with SPG, that it's actually targeting what it's intended to target, and being able to work through that clarity. Sometimes that happens through TLCs. I think a lot of times it happens in those communities of practice. Carrie meets with teachers and the coaches meet with teachers every week. And, you know, as they're looking at those assessments and the data in Otis, as principals are looking at that data in Otis when we're in admin meetings, you know, there is some consistency around, okay, who's doing what, and is it showing up like we wanted it? And if not, then, you know, it can feel vulnerable, but that's really where the best kind of questions and answers come out. Is, you know, when we thought it was working and now it's not, okay, what went wrong? What do we need to, we can adjust? I think one of the hurdles that I didn't expect to see this part of a hurdle, but it was really denoting, you know, the levels, you know, the 4 levels, the 3 levels, you know. Carrie knows this. I'm of the opinion it should just be met and not met. And you either got it or you don't on a lot of it. Because if you don't, it doesn't matter what level that you don't have it. So you can drill into that a little bit, but does it really give you a return on your investment of time to try to drill into it, you know, to that granular level? But making sure that everybody's comfortable with that scale is critical, and that everybody's willing to stick to it. You can't get halfway through the year and be like, well, you know, we thought this was great, but, and we got into that conundrum, you know, previously where, you know, we didn't like it and we were trying to make adjustments as we went. And we all know about unintended consequences. And so we had to deal with some of those things that created further issues. But I think, you know, having those conversations early, just being clear about what's acceptable, what's not, you know, what those measurements are going to be and how does it live in the platform, no matter what platform you have, is to stick to the fidelity of your decision.
Seems like Babcock Schools really does a good job of modeling taking risks at the administrator level and then supporting teachers through whatever that fallout or impact may be, as you were kind of talking about there, those unintended consequences that we have to work through. And I just think that's a really a good testament to the culture and climate of your school community, and that you are modeling like, hey, we're figuring this out and we're going to work with you if it doesn't work out. So I applaud you all for that. That's really special. Susan, tell us a little bit more about your perspective on this question. What early decisions or non-negotiables had the biggest impact on long-term success over at Monroe School District?
I'd echo, I think, a lot of what the Babcock leaders there are talking about. I think having openness and honesty with people about where you're at in the process, I think is really important. My principal has said we don't have like a lab type school where I can take all of this and put it in a lab and make sure it gets perfect and then bring it back to Monroe. Like it doesn't work that way. We're doing this as we go. And so our principals have really helped us stay centered and focused. So I guess I would say something that has had a big impact for us is just, we thought, I guess, that we needed a map, right? So you really want to plot out every single thing that's going to happen. But sort of like the ladies have already alluded to, that map can shift and change as things come up, or you find yourself kind of in uncharted territory, or you run up to this new thing or whatever. What we found in Monroe is that we really needed a compass. We really needed to know which direction we were going in. We needed to be solid on what those principles were. And our staff needed to understand that. Our administrators needed to understand that from building level all the way up through district level. And the principles are things that nobody can argue about, right? Like, well, you're going through this transition. For some folks, I've used this expression that there's sort of a grief, stages of grief for people who are leaving the traditional model, and they're so used to points and percentages and averages. And it sounds silly, but when you talk to people who do this work, honestly, they'll tell you that people are in denial and people are bargaining. And I honestly, so for us, having a sense of what those principles are. So one of our big principles is that kids are going to own their learning, right? A big principle is that those assessments are going to measure proficiency in whatever overarching skill you're working at. Kids are going to build competence in those skills. We're going to report things clearly. We're going to keep relationships at the center of what we're doing, because that really matters. So having those principles, I think, are really, really critical. Similar to their reference to Ken O'Connor's work, we leaned into Anthony Ribel's work. He's also a solution tree guy. His book is Beyond PLC Light. That's the one that we work from and use, and we've really liked it. And then another answer, honestly, we kind of stumbled into Otis. We met folks at Otis as a reference from another district we connected to up here in Wisconsin, but that's been a big change for us. We didn't have a system where we could bring everything together, where teachers and leaders could look across grade books and and extrapolate data out. So I think that's been a big impact. If I was still making spreadsheets, triangulating data from 4 or 5 different sources, there's no way we'd be as effective. So just having things in one place, I think has been a big lever for us.
Thank you. Yeah, certainly aligning around a tool and having that shared process for documentation and communication does make a difference. Your comment about the stages of grief just totally resonated with me. I was in a multi-year transition to standards-based grading, and each year it got pushed back because we were bargaining. The whole staff was like, well, we think we could do it this way. What if we meet in the middle and do it this way? Ultimately, it just kind of made it more complicated in the end to that the staff, the administration allowed the delay, because we lived in this weird hybrid world, and it was like you just needed to rip the Band-Aid off and move forward. But we were absolutely in the bargaining phase. We know everybody was upset at first, and then it was like, no, please, let's do halfway. So that's a really interesting way for leaders here today to kind of think about what this process looks like. And then if you can almost predict what challenges might, or anticipate the challenges that will come up, you can get ahead of that a little bit and maybe find here's what's changing, here's what's not type language for staff to help them feel more comfortable. I've seen that work for a lot of school leaders, just around we are still committed to student learning, but how we're going to do this one piece is different. So it's we're not changing our belief system, we're just changing a few things.
Right.
Okay. So we are going to look at a couple common scenarios that come up really no matter where you're at in your standards-based grading journey. If you're all the way in, you're probably going to sit here and be like, I've got advice for that too. But if you're earlier in the stages, you may still deal with this, and it's probably not something that goes away. These types of challenges come up every so often as people get comfortable and start falling into old habits. So we're just going to talk about a few real world scenarios, and the panel here is going to offer some advice to you all should you find yourself in this particular situation. So the first one we're going to talk through here is setting the stage. It's mid-year, which it is, so this feels timely. Teachers using the same standards, so you've aligned on that part, but proficiency looks different from class to class. Maybe you get in that PLC meeting, teachers are sitting down talking about proficiency, and you've got a red flag or a yellow flag that you're hearing as you're listening to those conversations. And the end result is that students are getting mixed messages as a result of this proficiency confusion. So if you walked into a district facing this right now, Carrie, just to kick us off here, what would your first move be to kind of restore that clarity and consistency among staff?
Yeah, so we've done some of this work in the past, specifically when it comes to our writing and like scoring writing based on rubrics, or when you're given a little more autonomy to the teacher to make those decisions on are they emerging, developing, mastering. And so in our PLCs, we did calibration sessions where, you know, they would, if it wasn't writing, if it was any piece of work in any content area, you all would look at that work together and you score it based on your proficiency scale together. And then we held some discussions as to, well, why did you score it that way? And what on our rubric says or made you say that that's the score that you gave it. How we use Otis and what Otis does for us, it kind of takes this out for us, because how we utilize Otis, we use the unit assessments. Every question is tied back to a certain standard, so it automatically grades for our teachers, and like and we use the a decaying average, right? So every piece of evidence that goes in for a student is adjusted over time. So every piece of evidence they get is a building block, and then it kind of adjusts their level over time.
Thank you so much for weighing in there. Shannon, what do you think? What would you do?
I think it's always important to find specific examples and put real examples from the work in front of them. And Carrie and I had to do this about this time last year. We were really seeing that that proficiency was not consistent when we were looking in the platform. We were seeing rubrics that were frankly just not even close to being up to par. And so we brought everybody together and we started showing specific examples of actual rubrics, of actual work evidence, and really started that dialogue around, okay, here's where we want to live, and here are our principles, our philosophies. Here's the expectation with our policies. Are we hitting the mark? And if we're not, then how do we self-correct? Right? It's all about self-correction and just owning where we are and going, all right, that's not where we need to be at this point. What are the things that we can put in place to get there? And sometimes they're hard conversations, sometimes they're uncomfortable. I think the administration has to be comfortable with some of that uncomfortable dialogue. You had mentioned ripping the Band-Aid off earlier. I think you get into positions of just spending inconsistent grading and poor proficiency expectations when you have a lot of rules. I think it really has to be clear about what the expectations are, the why behind it, and the accountability piece. And the faster you can get those in place and be comfortable with holding folks accountable for that, the much more quickly that you will see progress in learning for kids and for the students you're serving.
Imagine having that evidence also just kind of speeds things up, right? Like we can really clearly see here together where there could be a gap. What do we do now rather than like, what do you do? Because it is a, there's a bit of collective efficacy around, we can do this together. We can work on this. Susan, what do you think? Oh, sorry. Thank you. Susan, what do you think about this one? What would your first move be if you saw this happening in practice?
I really agree with Carrie and Shannon. Like, I think this is going to come into a calibration exercise. I like Shannon's point about getting something that you're actually using right now. Like, let's go get let's work forward. Let's go get next week's biology test. It's put it in front of us and let's be on the same page about what proficiency is together. What's on your list of success criteria? How are you going to know that that's where you're setting the bar? There's a couple other things that we've done that kind of shaped or related to this. I did some example scenarios with teachers in small groups. So I would give a fictitious student writing or a fictitious scenario and have teachers go through and score it around the table in their department or in their team and then share that. And some super interesting conversation came out of that. Plus, it was kind of safe because it was fake. It was a made up thing. So it's okay if we're not on the same page in the fake thing. What matters is that we get on the same page before we do it for real, folks. So that was a really cool exercise. And then another thing we did, I mentioned we did some of those summer workshop hours where we could work with teachers together on the curriculum. Okay, so in that, one thing we asked of them was to have calibrated rubrics done as part of that work. So they had to do a couple of things. They had to have a pacing guide committed to and set together as their PLC team, which we looked over. And again, back to principles. I don't care what your pacing guide looks like. If you put it in Google Sheets or Google Docs in landscape and bold, and it does not matter. But it does need to live up to these principles, right? And then we did the same thing with assessments. There are some types on what rubrics need to look like. And then these are the principles that your rubric needs to uphold. So we kind of made like checklists for teachers for what pacing guides look like and what rubrics look like. And then again, kind of walking through some scenarios. But I think what do you do right away? Right away, you go in and do some calibration exercises so that people can kind of recenter. In a former life, when I was an English teacher, I was an AP reader. So for anybody else on the call who is connected to the AP world, I did that for a number of years. And how you get good at that is by calibrating. They give you exemplars. They give you, stacks, and in your training, you have to calibrate so that you're going to score it the same way, no matter, what essay you get. And I think lean into that with teachers and do a similar exercise like that. And it can really take you pretty far. And then do it intermittently. I think Shannon mentioned that too. It's not something you're just going to do once in August in service and never do again. You got to bring that stuff back in front of people.
Susan, one thing I'm really hearing about your work that I want to shout out is you're just boots on the ground. If there's something that comes up, you're going into that meeting, you are bringing examples, you're bringing things to help, you're bringing exercises. And I mean, that's the reality of the work, right? This kind of stuff probably doesn't happen best behind a computer. We have to go sit in those meetings. We have to engage. We have to be collaborative, and we have to kind of be candid about what we're seeing and how we can move forward. So I just had to shout that out because I'm picking up that you're just like, I'm going to go and talk to them and we're going to sort this out. And that is what you have to do. So sometimes it's not as complicated as it seems, right? Although once you get there, certainly there's a lot to do.
Well, and to be clear, I'm not an administrator. I'm in a coaching position. So I don't have the ties, that other administrators have that they can get pulled away to. So if, people in your district, if there's folks who you can allocate to this kind of stuff, I think it can make a real difference because I can go be boots on the ground because I'm not also running the building. Now my principals and C&I directors come to all of that as much as they can and get in there too. But yeah, I'm in a special spot because I can go in and do that for sure.
That's good advice too for our school leaders who are with us here today, is that your coaches that's really, your coach is almost like your best ally in this, to be that person in those meetings when you can't be there. I know everyone has a different, architecture to how their teams work. So absolutely lean on the people who can be there, who can be doing that work. Okay, time at these webinars just flies by, friends. Thank you so much to our audience for the questions. We are going to get into Q&A shortly here. I want to do one more roadblock scenario situation with the group here, just to kind of talk about a challenge that may come up in your work. And then we will switch gears and open up into Q&A from you all, the audience. Thank you for teeing up so many questions for us and staying engaged. You all are truly an awesome audience to be with today. Okay, so for our last scenario, and anyone who's doing this work has probably been here. I know this happened in my own work. So the scenario is that teachers are tired. They're saying standards-based grading is heavier than I thought it was going to be. And then as a result of that, some start quietly averaging grades again, slipping in participation points for bringing in the Kleenex or the paper towels, or submitting something early. If you kind of lose this momentum mid-year as a staff, what advice would you give leaders who might be seeing some of these behaviors and maybe they're really early on, right? Or just starting to notice things are slipping? Susan, I actually want to offer you the chance to start here because I had you last on the last few. So Susan, what advice would you give for this situation?
So again, kind of back to that boots on the ground is you've got to go down and you got to go into their classroom and start a conversation about what's going on. Be empathetic. It is heavy. It is hard. It is a boatload of work. And those stages of grief that I mentioned earlier, you might think about, where is this teacher at in that? Are we still bargaining? Is there some anger or frustration underneath there? So I would lean in and try to have a real conversation with that person. And then the other thing I would ask, like, if you're doing that, first of all, I think for us, an aside here, in Otis, like, they really can't. We don't have average turned on. We run mode and recency, so there is no averaging. Sorry, I have a bell. I'm going to mute Kendall, and in case of their announcements, will you circle back to me? Let's toss the question.
Yes, I'll circle back to you. No worries. Shannon, do you want to jump in here and share what advice you might give to leaders seeing this momentum stall or some of these behaviors pop up?
Absolutely. I think it's always something that you have to address. You can't overlook it, because what you're willing to accept is what's going to permeate the culture. So yes, meet them where they are. Yes, as Susan said, have some empathy about where they are in that cycle, but make sure there's a plan in place once that conversation happens to get them back on track, get them comfortable, with the decision-making process, the philosophies that are in place. And, validate that. I think I heard Susan say, it is hard. This is hard work. But hard work is often worthy work for our students and for what we're trying to accomplish instructionally. And just reiterating for them, back to, what those pillars are, back to what that philosophy is, and making sure that you're making that connection for them, and supporting them. We have the luxury of having instructional coaches, and Carrie Luter does a phenomenal job of keeping her pulse on, what people are struggling with or what's going well. So celebrate it hard, or, celebrate the wins a lot. And, when you swing and miss, address it, put those supports in place, and course correct the best you can.
Thank you so much. And I love that you echoed what Susan shared just around kind of validating those feelings, because it is that just empathy that all leaders bring to these conversations that really does show an impact on teachers and just kind of make them feel like, hey, I understand. Carrie, anything to add here, or any additional advice that we can tap into you for on this particular challenge?
It is just, I'm along with Susan. We have some of those conversations you've got to go right to. I have the luxury of being able to sit in on a lot of our PLCs and just coaching sessions with our teachers. We have found that it's a confidence and understanding of how the platform works, how Otis works, how it's working for your system, how it's calculating, what's the best way to communicate to students. We have found that once students are comfortable with looking at what they have in there, then they can confidently communicate that home. So just providing that support in wherever they're at in their stage of grieving. I really do like that I'm stealing that, Susan.
I do have one thought.
Yeah, go ahead.
Carrie, what you just said, I think knowing that you're going to go in and have that conversation as leaders, and like you said, being able to sit in is so important. Like, when I first started teaching, I remember very strongly feeling the us them thing, right? Mm-hmm. And this work is so not that. It's so in the spirit of we're together. It's so in the spirit of collaboration. I would say to the leaders on the call, make it normal for your principal to be around. Make it normal for your coach, your CNI director, your whoever's at the head. Make it normal for those people to be around and know what's going on, and make it less we, us, them, and more collaboration, more that we're all, humans trying to figure this out and do right by kids. and staying anchored in your principles, I think is just so really important for folks.
Thank you so much. Well said. And I know you have the bell coming in a second here. So thank you for giving us the heads up there. We are in the thick of the day here, friends. I'm going to give our panelists just a quick moment to catch their breath, maybe take a sip of water. And there's been some chatter about Otis. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit more about Otis as a tool, and then we're going to get to that Q&A. I just saw a question come in that I am ready to toss to the panel in a second here. But listening to this conversation today, one thing I really heard is that the success of standards-based grading ultimately comes down to what teachers, teams, and leaders are able to do together every single day. And that's really where having the right system can make a difference. Districts need a consistent way to measure learning by standards, so those PLCs are looking at the same evidence. We heard that a few times today. Recreating different assessments or pulling from different places is just a disservice to that work. And with Otis, teams can assess student learning with shared rubrics, standard aligned items, and kind of keep the conversation as a team focused on what that learning looks like. You also heard from the group today that implementation can be a journey. We're all in different stages. Some are fully standards-based, communicating out mastery of learning standards. Others are doing a hybrid where they're converting to letter grades. Otis supports both through an interactive gradebook, so you can really move the work forward without forcing teachers into a system that doesn't really match the reality or the expectations of your district's grading model. So I think that's a really important point to note, is that there is a lot of flexibility within how you can configure things so that the work kind of just does itself once you've aligned on the systems. I do always say it's important to align those systems before you bring in an actual tool to support that work, because the tool should match the system itself, not be built around one or the other. But for school leaders, questions you might be asking is, how can I see that big picture? Where are my fifth graders at with their progress towards those fifth grade learning expectations or standards across the various classes and tools? Across the various classes and assessments. But with Otis, there are interactive visuals. We have AI-powered reports that can really provide those insights in real time to administrators. PLCs can also see this data. Teachers can see their students' progress. So whether you're exploring, piloting, or maybe scaling standards-based grading, there's a tool for everyone within Otis that can support that work. So I encourage you to reach out if you want to ask some specific Otis questions. We're going to go more philosophy implementation based for our Q&A here today. So we're going to kind of pull out some of those leadership questions from the chat. But if you have questions around technical things in Otis that came up that you want to dig into, we're at otis.com. And there's also some grading resources in that list that we put together for you that you can kind of poke around to get a better idea of the platform. So with that, I'm going to bring our panelists back for some Q&A here. We had a great question from an attendee here today. Thank you so much for this. We haven't really talked about that parent and family piece of grading, which is such an important piece of this work. So the question is, what are some pushbacks that you may have gotten from parents or families? And then how did you address their concerns to bring them on board? I'm just going to say, maybe Carrie, you want to start us off here?
Sure. We are a K-12, and we don't necessarily hear a lot of pushback from our elementary or middle, but it is definitely in our high school when you're trying to, make sure that kids are having a transcript and that, it's going to get them into college. And so we have done several parent nights. We've done some where we have our teachers do like a recording and a video to kind of explain how the grading works and how it transfers into a letter grade. And honestly, once they see how the system, how it lives and thrives and moves, those questions are less and less. But it's them just being clear about how you do report grades and how for our high school students, they will have a transcript that a college will accept, and it all works out.
Thank you. Shannon, anything to add there? Any parent communication conversations you've been in that are noteworthy to share?
No, Carrie and I actually did a lot of training with parents, and we tried to actually model PBL through the training. So we showed how we could differentiate the lessons, the readings within the lessons, assign it, in the platform so that they could see why it was valuable, and why it looked different for each kid, because it really can be personalized. But it really, as Carrie said, at the end of the day, they just want to know they can get out to college and that, what we're providing them with is going to help them transition successfully into the real world. And we have students who are graduating and parents who are now able to communicate that message at some level. Next year, I plan to have the student ambassadors lead the training for parents, especially for high school. So we'll be making some shifts where students are going to hopefully take some ownership in that process as well.
That's huge. I love hearing that. Lots of communication, lots of examples, but wow, having your students lead it, how powerful will that be for families to hear them say, here's what we're doing and how we're doing it and why. Susan, what about you? Any specific thoughts around this communication challenge that one of our audience members shared?
Yeah, I think for us, we did similar to Shannon and Kiri. We had some opportunities for parents to come in and meet with building leaders and teachers and talk about it. So that was available. We started by really empowering teachers. So when a parent is frustrated, typically the conversation goes through the kid into a teacher, or sometimes around the kid into a teacher. Some parents, jump the whole thing and call the superintendent, but most people start with the teacher. So we tried really hard to empower teachers. So I did a number of things, like I gave them talking points to be able to work from. I gave them scripts for emails so that they were replying the same way. We sent standard messages out at marking periods from all of us, which how that language was going to look. How does it look if the student is below proficiency? So that way we were talking about it the same way. And I think that helped a lot. We met with kids when kids were frustrated. We had conversations, little flex meetings with kids. So we did that as well. But I think arming your teachers is a big step. I also went to several school board meetings and talked about this at school board meetings, which are of course live streamed, so parents could listen in there, even if you couldn't come, if you want to come in and talk about it there. So we did that a bunch. Also, keeping the school board educated on what's going on is really, really important, because they're out in the community, and people who are concerned or have frustration will often reach out to them as someone they want to talk to. So I would say to leaders, making sure you're tied clearly and carefully to your school board members is another good step to take as they're going through it.
That's great advice. Thank you so much. I did see some questions coming up just around that reporting. Again, I dropped something in the chat that could be helpful. It's just an example of a standards-based report card. Keep in mind, everyone can set this up differently, different language, different scales. But just because I don't have an example from our panelists of theirs, I wanted to put that in there to kind of help folks see what a report card could look like. But we have a question that I want to ask. This might be our last question here. We'll see how we do, but I think it's a really important one. So this person chatted in, they said they're just getting started in their journey of switching towards standards-based grading with a goal of implementing in 27-28. So good for them. They've got a long-term goal they're working towards, but they're wondering, how can we help ease the anxiety that teachers are feeling? They're working with a consultant, and they have asked a pilot to kind of help them out with rubrics, but really just looking for any other suggestions from this group around how to set the tone for a really positive launch in 27-28. Shannon, do you want to jump in to start us off here? Oh, I think you're muted. Sorry.
Sorry about that. I think Susan had mentioned earlier, having that compass, know where you're going, what is your North Star with the implementation of standards-based grading, and scaffolding that out and really communicating that with folks. I'm not always great at that. I like to just go. And so sometimes, that requires to circle back and adjust things. But if you, know that that's your implementation timeline, really looking at, okay, so by that date, this is what we, want to have in place. This is, what our expectations are. This is how we're going to move forward, and begin scaffolding back. That no different than you would a particular, unit of instruction, right? Like, when does it need to be scaffolded back so that we can accomplish all of this before we actually start? And maybe having some pilot parent groups come in, start small. Let, small groups of teachers go ahead and start having those conversations with parents. the more they can have exposure to those conversations, the better off they're going to be, because they're going to be able to start anticipating what the questions are. It's always the same questions every year, a little bit different spin, but just exposure to those situations and helping them feel comfortable.
I love that. Susan, what about you? What do you think? How would you help kind of ease some of that anxiety, especially from that coaching role? I'm guessing you have, or are usually the one who hears it first. So what would you suggest from that other angle?
Yeah, I think I really agree. With what's already been said, the antidote to anxiety is, I think, usually conversation and planning, right? So conversation is helpful because when you have anxiety about something, it's underneath that is fear. Usually, I'm afraid I won't have enough time. I'm afraid I'm going to be bad at it. I'm afraid kids are going to hate it. So I think having a sense of what is your leadership response to that fear, and then as Shannon already said, like, what's your plan, and being really open about that with folks so they know this is when we're going to give you release time to work on it, or this is how PLCs are going to look, or I need to see your pacing guides by this day, or whatever. So like helping people have a sense of the plan. And the other layer, I guess I might add, is where are you with the conversation piece? Where are you using teacher leaders in your building for people to talk to, whether that's coaches like me or department heads, or what's that structure set up for teachers? Because they may not go right to their principal with this kind of stuff. They might want to talk to their peers. So lean on your building leaders. Everybody has them, those people who are in the vanguard out in front, and encourage them to have water cooler conversations, lounge conversations, parking lot conversations, and give them ways to talk about this. So that way you can collectively, it's everybody, you have to collectively work together to bring that stress down for folks.
Thank you so much. Carrie, I do want to offer you a chance to add any final words, any last bits of advice for this leader who's here with us today?
I mean, it's just echoing what's been said. It's just those clear expectations, knowing where you're going and communicating that with the staff so that they're aware. And then continuously coming back and making sure that they're with each new step as you get through your process and as you continue to onboard, like coming back and asking and making sure that they feel supported, that there's not any areas of questions, meeting them where they're at.
Thank you so much.
Oh, sorry.
Please. No, please go.
I have said this to teachers, and I don't know if this helps anyone out there, but I was working with some veteran teachers who were really struggling with the switch, right? And I said, like all of your other skills as a teacher, you can grow this one too, right? You got better at classroom management. You got better at, pacing, and you got better at assessments, and you got better at all of those things. Like all your other skills as a teacher, you can get better at this too. And that, I think you could just see, like, the shoulders dropped and we exhaled and we just felt like, oh yeah, I have grown and evolved as a teacher, and I am going to continue and grow and evolve. And just I think, again, whether that's your leaders or your administrators or your coaches or whoever it is, helping people know that they can grow in these skills too is just really important.
I truly cannot think of any better words to close on. That was just such a nice recap of everything you three have shared today. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise, being vulnerable with our audience, and just being honest about what you've experienced in your role. You three are truly incredible leaders. So we're very thankful to have you here sharing your insights. And thanks to everyone for joining us for this webinar. That concludes the content we have for you all. I know our leaders are busy in school buildings, so I do want to let them get back to their staff and students. If you're interested in learning more about Otis, we are at otis.com. It's on the screen now. So thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Kendall. And what I'm going to do just in the closing few seconds, I am going to push on your screen some related content that we mentioned earlier. So that should be on your screen now. It includes an ebook on how 3 schools are communicating mastery for those standards-based grading scales, as well as some other great articles in there. So just take a few minutes to click on those. And now I'm also going to push on your screen the post-event survey. So as I go through my closing remarks in just a few seconds, please take the next few minutes or so to take that survey, because we'd love to hear from you. But first off, just want to thank our panelists here for your time here today. And I'd also like to thank our sponsors at Otis. And to our audience, I'd like to thank you for joining us as well. For those of you who enjoyed our presentation today, we have more webinars like this one that are provided by us here at DA or District Administration, which is the leader in editorial coverage of news, current issues, as well as trends in K-12. And like I said about an hour ago at the top of the hour, we at DA will be sending you a link to the slides as well as the on-demand recording to this. And even though we weren't able to get to all your questions today, there were quite a few of them. We at DA will be sharing them with our partners at Otis, so they'll get to your questions individually after today's event. So you can expect that in the coming days or so. So with that, on behalf of DA, this is Stephen Blackburn. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. And thank you again to our sponsor at Otis. This was great.